Hey guys, this is Richard Cook here again, GameStarrArts, and today I've actually, for the past week or two or three, I've gotten quite a few requests asking about a Maya to ZBrush workflow, and up to this point I kind of haven't really known how to go about doing that, simply because a lot of people today might be using the latest version of Maya, which would be Maya 2013, I believe, or Autodesk Maya 2013, and as you can see up here, I'm still using Autodesk Maya 2008. Why am I using such old software? Well, to be honest with you, it's always done what I needed it to do. I've never had to take advantage of things in a major way that, like the particles or the hair or anything like that. I haven't had to take anything from those in the latest iterations of Maya, and those things have probably got the most changes. There's certainly some advancements in the UV mapping and mesh tools and all that stuff, but to be honest, I've still been able to churn out a pretty good piece from just this and ZBrush and Photoshop, and so I've never really just taken it to go to the next version. I've always just kind of settled and worked with this version. So I know a lot of people might be using the new version, but hopefully these principles that I'm going to show you today will stay pretty sound, and hopefully people will take something from that and not just from the specific software that I'm using, so or this version of the software that I'm using. So today we're actually going to go ahead and do our a ZBrush sculpt that I'm hoping is going to give you some better ideas about certain principles in sculpting and certain principles for roughing out shapes and things like that from really basic starter shapes and stuff. And this will be something to where if you have watched the ZBrush Basics series and you're just learning ZBrush, or maybe you're even just learning to get into 3D and stuff like that, this could be definitely used as something of a supplement to your first ZBrush sculpt, or something rather that might help you get into it a little faster and start to really understand the basic principles and things behind it. So the first thing we're actually going to start out with is right here in Maya, or whatever program you're using. You might be using 3ds Max or Blender or something like that. Either way, these principles should all work the same. So we're going to go ahead and start out here, and we're going to create ourselves a cube. And the cube we're going to take, and we're going to start subdividing it in a few different ways. We're going to divide the faces up and do some extrusions and get ourselves a really basic rough shape to work out with, and take out to ZBrush with us. So you see we got our cube here. What I'm going to do is actually go ahead and split up the faces. Actually, what I can do here is just subdivide the faces. And we got this right here. Now we have a few faces divided here. This will give us a little more control over the rough shapes of the cube. And what we're going to start out doing is start shaping out a head. You can do that first, taking some basic steps here and shaping out things like how a head looks like. Now, of course, a lot of these things, when you start out doing them, it's going to be kind of a Bob Ross situation. If everybody remembers The Joy of Painting on the PBS there, and Bob Ross, and it's like a lot of times you would see him paint something and go, oh my god, why is he doing that? He just screwed up the whole painting, you know, and then he would end up turning it into this amazingly beautiful thing. And that's kind of something you get adept to whenever you start learning how to do these things. You learn how to problem solve, and you learn how to work around a lot of things. Even if you make a mistake, it could be like, you know, like Bob Ross used to say, a happy little mistake or whatever like that. And it could be something that could change your design for the better or something like that. Anything could happen, really. But you live and you learn, and once you go through all these trial and error things, then you can start to see how to work around certain situations and turn something that might look really rough in the beginning into something that's really awesome in the end. So that's just one thing you can keep in mind whenever you're designing something. Now, of course, through all this, I'm not going to make you sit through me roughing out something like this. I'm going to let you do your thing, because even though you're following along, maybe, you may not end up with the same sculpt, but hopefully you'll end up with a similar result in terms of quality, or in terms of vision or anything like that. So hopefully, if you're doing this right now, and yours might not be like just along the line, just keep in mind, practice does make perfect. I'm just going to show you the basic foundations of how to get things together and get your first sculpt going, and hopefully that will give you something to work off of, a foundation, something to practice upon and keep working on, and hopefully it turns into something great down the line. You see here, all I'm really doing, very simple stuff, moving vertices around. I'm just getting certain faces in certain points and certain markers in certain points that will give me a sort of rough map of how things are going to start out. And even along the sign here, you can use things like extrudes, like I'm about to do here. Go ahead and extrude the neck here. And you can do things like the, at least in Maya anyway, you can use the paint selection tool to select faces. And that way you can start to get more shape into the head itself. Instead of just dragging out individual vertices, you can move large groups of faces or vertices to get things into place much faster. So I'm going to go ahead and just keep on roughing this out, and eventually we'll get to a point where we can take it into ZBrush and start roughing out our initial sculpt for it. Alright, so we are going to start sculpting this guy out and getting us some basic forms going. Now, when you first get them into ZBrush, like I said, when you drag them out and everything, just check all your stuff. And after that, we're going to use our nice little move tool here to further rough out those shapes. Now, make sure you turn on X symmetry with the X key, and we'll start getting a more defined shape out of him with this. And keep him at the low poly level, because now we're able to move large groups of vertices and polygons just with the move tool alone. And this actually is really good, because it's not like in Maya to where you're grabbing individual vertices or anything. You're actually able to shape out something using the move tool with general, like pulling from general space, which can really help get a more defined shape. Now this guy, even though I don't really know how he's going to turn out, I already know he's going to have a kind of defined nose, a little cartoonish nose kind of, I guess. But it's definitely a creature nose. And we'll try to bring his eyes down a little bit. And this kind of brings me to this next point that I wanted to talk about too, and that's when you're building out your basic forms, you're just creating large detail. And a lot of people will make the mistake of like immediately jumping right to the high subdivisions in their sculpt. They'll jump like up to 5 levels or something like that, and they'll start trying to rough in these large forms or whatever, maybe using something like the standard tool, and they'll start going to town on the large forms or whatever. But what that's going to cause is that if you start doing this at a high level of subdivision, and then say you want to step back in subdivisions for any reason, then you're going to have a little bit of an issue with how it's shaped out. And even more so whenever you go back to your high subdivisions, it's moving a lot more polygons at this. So you can't use things like a smaller brush to move large groups of polygons because you're moving them in a smaller scale. And so what that's going to cause is this kind of blobbiness. And that really takes away from a lot of the form of whatever you're trying to do, because most of the time the blobbiness is not going to be a desirable effect. So you're going to find yourself going back over it with the smooth tool several times, and it's just not going to look right. So the best plan of attack for any model, jump all the way back here, the best plan of attack for any model is going to be to start at the very lowest subdivision and get as much detail in on that subdivision as you possibly can before moving to the next. This is going to allow you to have cleaner forms, and it's going to allow you to have a more defined shape, which is very important. So we're just going to continue doing this here. And once more, if you didn't watch the ZBrush Basics series, you don't really know what's going on, I would suggest going back and watching that if you're still learning ZBrush, and if you're missing something, or don't know how to, or don't remember how to do something, I would definitely suggest going back and watching that. I do cover a lot of stuff for the basics of ZBrush. So if you can find that in any of those videos and then come back to this, that's great too. But we're obviously not paying too much attention to the functions of the tools, because I had already taught that in that series, and we're paying more attention to the principles. So we are going to fly through this at a decent pace and not focus too much on one area. And also, since we'll be fading between the progress on this, if you find yourself not having anything desirable out of what you are creating, you can always download the meshes I have for each part of this process. I uploaded them to the links below, and you can download those and use them as basis for sculpting if you'd like. Or if you also just wanted to continue and use your own mesh, just follow the general principles is what I'm getting at. And even though it may not turn out looking exactly like mine, you should still definitely learn the process and how that works, and hopefully take something away from that. And by the way, I am using a Wacom tablet for this. Some people only have the mouse available to them. That's fine. You can do plenty with the mouse. It's a little more tedious process, but it's certainly possible. I do personally find the Wacom a lot easier to use than a mouse, but that doesn't necessarily mean nothing's impossible, of course. So just keep working and doing what you can with what you got. Okay, so I'm just going to keep on working on this and try to get myself a little more desirable base to start at, and then we'll move up to the next subdivision and start roughing in the even larger details. Okay, so now you see that we have a little more defined shape to him. I went ahead and I dragged out his neck to kind of create a bust in a sense. But all I did was use the move tool for this, of course, so just keep in mind that I didn't use anything special or anything like that. I didn't extrude it or anything. I just used the move tool and dragged all these out. And there's a reason for this, because after we go ahead and subdivide them, we're going to be taking advantage of the new Dynamesh capabilities of ZBrush. And not necessarily new in the sense that it hasn't been around for the last 3 versions or so, but in the sense that I have not shown anybody how to use it yet. There's plenty of ZBrush Central and YouTube tutorials on it out there. If you go ahead and check those out too, it might be a little more in-depth about that, but we're just going to jump right into it and learn how to use it real quickly to go ahead and kind of just get this guy fleshed out. So what we're going to do next, before we do all that stuff, is divide him one time. I just did that over here in the geometry menu, divide. And it go ahead and rounds out the shapes there and everything. So we're just going to continue refining the large detail. We are still defining the large detail in him. Remember, don't go too crazy trying to get wrinkles and stuff in at this level. That's a common mistake a lot of people make when they first start sculpting. You just want to get the nice large details, and you want them to start looking like the creature he's going to become. And just keep on doing that. And we'll try to get something a lot more defined. And you'll see more so in the upper subdivision levels, even the large detail ones, the lower subdivision levels that allow you to put in the large detail, you can still get quite a bit of detail in them if you just keep on pushing things around and keep experimenting with things. I've seen a lot of people get some very, very nice detail out of some low subdivisions, so it just takes a little practice, a little time. Of course, you'll notice right off that his eye sockets are, yes, they are empty, because we're going to put some spheres in there a little later to give him some eyes, but we'll worry a little bit more about that maybe when we jump up to the next subdivision, so that when we can start pulling his eyelids in and start shaping it around that eyeball. But right now we're just still getting the basic forms of the face down. You definitely want to get whatever anatomy down that you're trying to get. Most people will always refer to human anatomy for almost anything, even creatures, which is a good thing to keep in mind, even though creatures might have their own unique anatomy in a sense. But still, having the basic knowledge of human anatomy can definitely help matters, because it gives you a really nice foundation to start from. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and break out the standard brush tool now. I think it's about time to do that, and we can just start really defining the large parts of them that you're really going to see stick out. And if you're having trouble thinking about, well, what's the large detail, what should I start on first or anything, a nice way to go about it is actually to kind of just go in this circle and just keep going back and forth, just like ping pong it. You start from here, or you start from here, or whatever, and then you just float around the face, and you just kind of bring things out a little bit at a time, and then you just go in reverse, and you just keep repeating that process until you have something desirable. So that way you're constantly moving around the mesh. You don't have uneven detail anywhere or anything like that. Because a lot of times you might focus too much on one area, and this head might come out looking like this by the time you're finished it, because you kept messing around with the detail in that area and you weren't focusing on the composition as a whole and trying to even out the detail between the entire mesh. So we'll go ahead and time-lapse this, and I'm just going to keep working in the large detail, and hopefully we can come up with something out of this, and we'll move on from there. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and keep continuing to bring them up. You can see it's starting to take a little more shape. I did bring them up another subdivision level here. Let's close our little subtool palette. And bring them up another subdivision level there. And you can see the large forms are starting to take a little more shape. So we're going to go ahead and leave them at that subdivision, actually. And don't worry about these little things over here, like the stretching on the ears, because we're going to go ahead and eventually use Dynamesh whenever we get to a higher subdivision to take care of all that, and it'll re-topologize our entire mesh and make things a little easier for us. But as for right now, we're going to go ahead and just continue to sculpt in the large forms. So just continue to do that. And this is also the threshold where we're starting to kind of work between that large and between that medium detail. And that's something where you're going to start to get these like little. You're going to start to sculpt in the little crevices and stuff, and basically all the parts that you want to protrude or the fallback on in as far as goes the anatomy on them. And we'll start to do all that stuff and fill that all in. And you can also start to work in like things like right here what I'm doing, like the large skin folds, the ones that are going to have the most prominence on them. And again, don't worry about that stretching. It's going to get real cubey. It's going to get real sharp edges to it. So, because we're still at a really low subdivision right now, but it's all going to come together in the end. So. We're getting this Adam's apple here. And for the most part, sculpting, whether you're going from the large detail all the way down to the fine detail, it's just a revision process. It's honestly, it's one of those processes that if you are a perfectionist of any sort, which a lot of us artists are, you'll never really be done with a piece, because even when you consider yourself done with it, you might look at it a few months later or something and think that it could have done with a lot of improvement. Like, think of a lot of things you could have done differently. But there is a point where you just kind of have to let it go and hope for the best kind of critique on it from anybody you're trying to get to review the piece, or if it's just a personal piece, you know, hope that you won't think too much of the changes that need made sometime down the line. You do want to be happy with the piece whenever you let it go, but you do have to let it go at some point, otherwise you're just going to continue to refine it. In some cases you might over-refine it and it might just look worse than it did before. It's just something you want to avoid too. But since we're bridging the link between the large and the small detail, we can work in these things like the skin folds and start to push that detail a little more. Here's another thing I'm going to use actually is the pinch brush. And once more, we're going to make this guy using standard tools, because if you don't happen to have the ZBrush 4R4, which is the version I'm using right now, you might not have access to all these like new brushes or anything like that, and especially if you don't have anything above R2, you're not going to have the tools needed to finish the guy that I'm using anyway. But I really want to emphasize that you can do some really awesome sculpts with the really basic tools, and that's what we're trying to do right here. We're going to continue using the basic tools that come out of the package with ZBrush, and we're going to try to get the best sculpt we can out of that. So I'm using the pinch brush right now to kind of give these folds a little more definition, make them actually look like folds, because folds will press up against other folds. That's just how the skin works. But we do want it to retain that look of thickness to it. We're not going to do too much down here with the bust, I don't think, because otherwise I'd have to extend out and give him like shoulders, and I don't really want to do that. We're just going to stick to a really basic bust with the neck here. So I'm not going to pay too much attention down here, although I will put some detail into this area, like where the spine is. Because the areas where there's protrusions are the ones that kind of stick out the most in the visual of it, in the visual aspect of it too. People will notice things like protrusions right away. So we'll just kind of smooth that out a little bit, and we'll come back to that. But again, just continue going over. You can see even right here, I can get some bags under the eyes going, even though we're still low poly. You can still see some definition in the eyes now. Again, we're going to be putting eyeballs in here in a second, so don't worry a whole lot, just kind of get the outside definition of that. And we'll just continue roughing the rest of this in. But again, really push the detail as much as you can for this subdivision level, because it's going to pay off later whenever you come back and you're trying to rough in the finer details. You kind of have this base canvas to start from with the large detail. Okay, so I'll go ahead and time lapse from here, and we'll continue moving on up to the next subdivision level and the next level of detail.